nicely.
Very good. All right. So
Shelley, could I just say one word? I don't
as
want
if I could stop you.
I don't want the position of the elected Attorney General to be diminished by pointing to limitations in the Attorney General's powers. The reason why the U.S. Attorney ultimately prosecuted Harry Thomas was because of the work the AG's office did, and Irv, and the same folks who had worked before I left. The Attorney General can be a statesman. He can say what needs to be said, and he can prod and press and impress the U.S. Attorney to bring cases that need to be brought, because the Attorney General has the power to accumulate the kind of probative evidence and make it public if necessary and appropriate to ensure that that case is brought. So I don't want you to think in terms of whether you're going to run for elected Attorney General that your role is diminished because the U.S. Attorney has power as well.
Okay. So the rules of professional conduct require that a lawyer be a zealous advocate, and that requires that the lawyer be loyal to his or her client. We've touched on this a little bit, but who are the clients of the Attorney General? Who is the Attorney General loyal to? Who is the Attorney General zealously representing? Peter, let me start with you, and then Kathy, and then we'll
Well,
go
that
down the
issue
road.
came up, under the law, unless the law has changed since I was AG, the AG is directly responsible to the mayor. Directly responsible to the mayor. He's appointed by the mayor, and he can be discharged by the mayor for no reason at all.
That is not the law now.
It may have changed, but in my view, and I said this many times, I think the Attorney General has an obligation to everyone in the city. And there was no instance when I advised a certain course of action that I thought was best for the residents of the city where the mayor said, well, there's a political issue here that I need to resolve. Never happened.
Kathy?
The residents of the District of Columbia. I spoke to that a few minutes ago. I think that's the entity to which the Attorney General should be most loyal, should always have in mind. And that can be defined, that can be interpreted, but I think that's where the buck stops. That's where the buck should stop.
Irv?
I don't agree with either of them. Obviously, the Attorney General has an obligation to carry out the law and to do what's in the best interest of the district. The client is actually the municipality. That is the entity that you are responsible for. The same as in private practice if you represent a corporation. The corporation is your client. It isn't the shareholders, it isn't the officers, it isn't the directors. It's the entity that's the corporation. And the municipality is a municipal corporation. And you need to do what is in that corporation's best interest. Now, the mayor is the spokesperson, the same as a CEO of a private corporation. But you have to distinguish between the mayor with respect to his personal interests or political interests and the obligations as the CEO of the municipality. I come back to the same example that we had before with Walter. If the mayor had his choice about budget autonomy, of course he would want to have budget autonomy. If the citizens of the District of Columbia were my client, of course I would want to have budget autonomy. Everybody in the district would want to have that. But we're a municipality and we're governed by a charter that's established by the Congress. And it's the job of the Attorney General to be sure that the municipality is engaged in lawful activities, is doing what it is responsible to do, and that it is bound by law to do. And that is what the Attorney General has to do. Now, and so, for example, you get situations, you get terrible damage claims brought by individuals. If the citizens were your clients, of course you want to reward those people and pay as much as you could for that citizen who has suffered terribly. But if the municipality is your client and you have to have fiscal responsibility and recognize that if you pay out these enormous sums, that then the city is not going to be able to meet its other obligations that are enormous obligations that it has in a variety of ways, including under a variety of court orders. You have to look to the municipality to see what is in its best interest and make that judgment. And there are a lot of hard calls, as Bob has said. So these aren't easy. And then, of course, there are situations when you are representing the agency directors who have been sued, and they were acting within the scope of their employment, and so you have to represent them. You obviously have to listen to the mayor, who has responsibilities there. And I've had the same experience that Peter has. I never had a situation in the time I've been there where the mayor suggested that we do something for political reasons that was against the law or not in the interest of the municipality. And that's what we have to look at and ensure that those interests are served. And that, I think, is what an attorney general must do.
Robert.
At the risk of making this even more complicated, I agree in principle with her that the District of Columbia is the client in the abstract. Who speaks for the client oftentimes is the mayor, and that's perfectly fine in many matters. But there are many matters for which the mayor does not speak for the client. And so therefore you have to figure out in each matter who the client is. Because it's not exactly obvious, and it's not the same when you are the Attorney General. For example, in civil litigation matters, the mayor or the agency directors will oftentimes speak for the client. That's perfectly fine. In a criminal case, it would be highly inappropriate for the mayor to be telling the Attorney General who to prosecute and who not to prosecute, in my view at least. And therefore, you're not looking to the mayor as the client. The city as a whole, its interest in public safety, as spoken by the Attorney General, is who the client is in
I agree with that.
prosecution. Child support, you are actually representing the non-custodial parent trying to get the money back, or getting the money from the custodial parent, getting money from the non-custodial parent. In domestic violence cases, the Attorney General represents the victim in many cases trying to get a civil protection order or a temporary protection order against his or her abuser. He or she is your client in that case, under the umbrella of doing the public good. So I agree with everything that the Attorney General, the current Attorney General, has said. However, I think that it is too simplistic to say in an abstract way it is the municipality, because different people speak for that interest at different times. And when you are a lawyer in the Attorney General's office, your very first question that you ask on day one is, who is my client for purposes of what I am about to do? Because that's where you have to then fall into the rules of professional conduct and make sure you observe all those rules. Because if your client is a victim of domestic violence, there's a privilege that attaches, and you have to be aware of that. If your client is a child support custodial parent, there is a privilege that attaches, and you have to be aware of it. So again, it is a big office, right? 60-something sections, general counsel's offices, subsections, this, that, and the other. You have to learn over time, as we all do, what they do to determine who is there.
I agree with Bob, but you have to have this caveat, which is that, for example, if you're representing an individual in a domestic violence or even in the custodial parent situation, they can't control the litigation completely. They can't demand that you do things that are inappropriate or that would set a bad precedent or would not be in the interest of the municipality. So you are representing them. They are a client. It is a privileged communication, but there is still a higher authority, a higher responsibility, which I agree, in those kind of situations, it's the Attorney General that has to make the call, and it's not beholden to anyone because he has to make the call or she on behalf of the best interests of the municipality.
Wow, it sounds like a hard job. I hope we aren't dissuading any potential candidates. So let me ask, in a lightning round, beginning again with Peter, what piece of advice, not 11 pieces, but what piece of advice would each of you give the next Attorney General?
I would say that the elected Attorney General ought to keep his eye on...
Or her.
Or her.
I don't want to dissuade anybody.
Well, I hate to get into this his or her, and whoever becomes the Attorney General has to keep his or her eye on being the Attorney General. I think that's one of the great problems that is going to crop up here, that every Attorney General, be it McDonald in Virginia, or Cuccinelli in Virginia, or Cuomo in New York, or Spitzer in New York, first thing that happens when they attain this political power, start thinking about becoming the mayor. And almost by definition, the individual running for Attorney General is going to be a politician. That's a huge danger. So I would say, if I were advising the new elected Attorney General, be the Attorney General. Learn about that office. Don't become a politician, in effect, getting ready to run for mayor in the next election, because that is probably going to happen.
Okay, Kathy.
One of the things that I believed as an elected official was that the best way I could get reelected was to do my job well. So let me just say that as a commentary on what Peter just said. One of the things that I would encourage our first elected Attorney General to do is to appreciate the fact that he or she will be the first person in that particular iteration of the job, and to really have some respect for the position and for what went before. I think Bob mentioned having lunch with John Farron and getting a piece of advice. I would advise the next Attorney General to get together with virtually everyone up here on this panel and really try to learn from them and to take their advice and to really learn about the job from their very personal individual perspective. I think that would provide a wealth of information and a good grounding.
Herb?
Well, in addition, I think both Peter and Kathy make good points. If I had to give one bit of advice to the incoming Attorney General, it would be to recognize what a talented group of lawyers he or she is inheriting, and to rely on the advice of those people and to maintain them in office. The one thing that I urged, and actually Phil Mendelson was the only member of the City Council to agree with, was that this election should be a nonpartisan election, and that the people should run basically not as partisans, and to operate this office in an apolitical way. And a second thing which I have urged, which has also been rejected by the council, my record with council is quite limited, is...
They confirmed you, though.
They did unanimously, I would point out.
Before we start
that was before I made any proposals. The proposal I have is that the local Hatch Act should be amended so that members of the Attorney General's office today can run for the office without having to resign from their positions. Those are some of the best people who have been in this office for a long time, know this office, would be excellent candidates, and they are, in my view, quite inappropriately barred from the office because of our local Hatch Act, which could easily be amended to accommodate.
I think all of the advice that you've heard so far makes very good sense, and I would add just one other piece. To whomever is elected, do nothing for the first few weeks. You will have run on some platform that pledged this, that, or the other thing. You will promise to restructure, streamline, do this, do that, do this, do that. And quite honestly, even if you're inside the office, unless you're sitting in Irv's chair, you have no idea what you're talking about. You have to go into that office and listen and look and see what goes on day in and day out. The smartest thing that I ever did, and I didn't do many smart things, but the smartest thing I ever did was the very first month I went to every section. I met with them with and without their managers, and I just listened. What works, what doesn't work, what do you like, what don't you like, if you could do whatever you wanted, what would you do? Just listened to what they did, because I needed to learn. And then when I did start making changes later on, they had more respect for them, or at least were willing to tolerate them, because they knew at least I had heard what they had to say. So a new AG, especially for coming from outside the office, it's so big, it is so diverse, it is so complex, it is so important. Take time.